Before I get much into the photographs, I'm going to try to give you a little bit of a background in terms of what I do. As I said on the first day, this is really quite new to me. I was totally never into kites in my life, not particularly into photography, and it was really only 8 months ago we started doing this kite aerial photography. And I'll tell you how I got into it a bit, and we found it incredibly useful, and largely under Brooks' tutelage, we've been incorporating it quite a bit into our work. So what I do for a living, it's called near-surface environmental geophysics, and one of my colleagues probably best defined it after returning from some work down in Antarctica. Near-surface geophysics is going to incredibly beautiful, incredibly remote parts of the world with very complicated and expensive equipment and spending a lot of time repairing it. So first, where I'm from, it's Calgary, Alberta, which I'm talking to people here. It's amazing. So many have, with all these people that have this very visual sense of the world, have no idea where it is. It's on the east side of the Rockies, and it's a relatively young city, even by North American standards. 1877 is when it was first inhabited by Westerners. The Northwest Mounted Police came to Calgary at the confluence of the Elbow and the Bow Rivers and built this Fort Calgary, and they built it there to stop the whiskey trade, which entailed, up until then, main interest in Western Canada for the Hudson Bay Company was trading furs for guns, but then the Americans started trading whiskey for furs, so the Indian trade started shifting south to the U.S. So the Canadian Northwest Mounted Police, later to be the RCMP, built a series of forts to stop this whiskey trade. And it is right in downtown Calgary. Get on, focus that. Great. So essentially the work we do entails measuring physical properties of the Earth, a large array of physical properties, the conductivity, the magnetic susceptibility, the resistivity, the density, whatever. We have an array of about 40 different instruments measuring the physical properties of the subsurface of the Earth. Every physical property we measure, it's registered to a specific point in the Earth as recorded by our global positioning system. And the idea is to find some physical property that distinguishes what we're looking for, our target, a metal sarcophagus, a landfill, a salt spill, a cavern, whatever physical property distinguishes our target from the surrounding conditions. So here we're mapping salt contamination from a lime sludge pit, and he's carrying around this instrument that measures the conductivity of the subsurface and the GPS with the GPS antenna. In a day, we can record literally tens of thousands of physical property measurements with tens of thousands of coordinated reference on geographic points. This is, in this case, we're pulling an EM61 metal detector with, again, the GPS. This particular instrument, it was developed by a Canadian company in Toronto for mapping unexploded ordnance, essentially bombs. It's the best metal detector in the world, but not only is it highly sensitive, but it gives a good image of what the aspect ratio of the target. So you can go to a bombing range and you can distinguish the few thousand bombs that are buried from the tens or hundreds of thousands of pieces of shrapnel. So again, we just happily move along, collecting a measurement with this instrument every few centimeters, and then a GPS positioning point every few centimeters. And at the end of one of these exercises, we end up with a map. So a map is always the basis of what of the final product, as well as going forward with the further investigation. So this, for instance, is a map created from that first instrument, the EM31 conductivity, and we have the hot areas, the high pink areas, which represent very elevated conductivities, the blue areas, which represent low background conditions, and the various grades in between. And so it's very clear where our source of contamination is, even if it's not very clear from the ground. And then also you can see we map in a large number of infrastructural objects, pits, ponds, monitoring wells, other pits, holding ponds, buildings, whatever. Because these, first of all, just for general referencing, and secondly, a buried tank, a building, a fence, those can also impart elevated conductivity because they're metal, so we want to know where they are. So already you can inherently see the use of this technique. Now, quite often, you know, during my work, especially talking to hydrogeologists, soil scientists, I often think of a very famous impressionist painter, Paul Gauguin, who said, "I close my eyes in order to see." But certainly one thing now using this tightrope photography made me realize that, in fact, it may sound very trite, but a picture is worth 1,000 words. This is a site of a salt spill. We did geophysics in this site over 10 years ago. It's now undergoing reclamation. There's 2 wells here that are pumping salt water out from the leachate and vegetation. It's a mix of barley, canola, and wheat is trying to reestablish itself. And very clearly we can see the degree that stressed vegetation is still impacting on the soil. And this is it's very powerful. We can coordinate it with the geophysics plot. This photograph we've actually turned, it's actually rectified, so it's 2 scale, it's base map, because these 2 monitoring wells, these 2 pumping wells have been surveyed in, so we know the precise locations of those. And then of course we can now go back year after year and monitor this part of the site as well as other areas of the site, and monitor very clearly how quickly the vegetation is reestablishing itself. Generally you can see the sizes of the sites we're looking at are even smaller than the sizes of the sites that Jim is looking at as he's looking at larger gross geomorphological features. Then briefly, I'm just going to give a few series of slides to show you where we first got into this. This is a Paul Kane painting from a fort, of Hudson Bay Fort at Rocky Mountain House. It's in central Alberta. It's the first settlement in Alberta, established in 1821. And a few things I want you to notice in the painting as we go into the photographs and the geophysics. There's the fort. We have this big house in the back. That's the main Hudson Bay house. We have these sentinel structures, and then we also have, you notice there's a peak, a triangular annex to the fort, and then in the back we have the main part of the fort, and then these large posts along the wall spaced. We know they're spaced about 10 feet apart. Those are called king posts, and that would be the structure. They build these forts. They put in these large king posts, and then have Philip pickets in between. And the fort was, again, it was established in 1821, and it was burnt to the ground in 1848. The Hudson Bay Company relied on the Blackfoot Indians for food, for buffalo meat, but the reason they were there was to trade guns with the Kootenai Indians for furs. The Blackfoot weren't happy about this gun for fur trade with their mortal enemies, the Kootenai. So in 1848, in the winter, they stopped bringing food to the Hudson Bay people, starved them out. They abandoned the fort, marched for 3 days to Edmonton to the north, and then the Blackfoot burnt the fort to the ground. So Parks Canada wanted to. This whole area is Alberta's first National Historic Site. Parks Canada wanted to find the fort, and they wanted to, if we could also recover any architectural information on the fort, what it looked like. And essentially all that's out there is this empty farm field. So the main technique we used to find the fort was magnetic radiometry, because when anything is baked above a temperature called the Curie point, the magnetic dipoles in that material realign, and you get a magnetic signature. So we mapped the site with magnetic radiometer, and this is the plot of the area. Each of these pink spots is a king post that was in the ground below the plow layer that burned for many, many days and imparted a small but measurable magnetic anomaly. So we know we had a template of what the fort looked like from the Paul Kane painting and diaries of the inhabitants of the fort, and we simply overlaid that template. We have the bastions. We have this the main square part of the fort. We have the main Hudson Bay house. We have this small square here that's actually a 2 by 2 meter interior hearth to a cabin. It was excavated, and we have these large circular pink anomalies that are exterior hearths, outside buildings. Then we have this triangular annex that comes out quite clearly, and this triangular annex is where the Hudson Bay people traded with the Indians, so they didn't have to bring the Indians to the main part of the fort. Well, after we wrote the report and did all the work, going through the archives of Parks Canada to gather some more information, we came across this photograph that had been overlooked, and it was in the early 60s, before it was a park, and very clearly you can see the fort, and or at least part of the fort as it existed. And you can see some of the main walls, parts of the buildings. Part of it's been obscured by this road building. But this was about 10 years ago, and this was the first inspiration for us to start looking for some type of means for low-level photography. But it never even crossed our mind to do it from kites or anything other than airplanes or helicopters. We'll come back to this later. So now going to some work we've been doing since we've had the gear that Brooks put together for us in the last 8 months. This summer we were over in the Middle East, in Qumran, on an expedition looking for Dead Sea Scrolls. The idea was that scrolls may have been left behind since their discovery in 1947, scrolls that were hidden in caves 2,000 years ago, but those caves may have been sealed off in earthquake activity in the last 2,000 years. Of course, the scrolls are so important to the Western world because they're the oldest versions of the Bible, predating any other version by over 1,000 years. As part of this expedition, we did a lot of work in the cemetery, because one of the main objectives of the researchers was to understand who wrote the scrolls, and the best way to understand that is to understand their burial practices, which would have been associated with particular ethnicity. So we did a lot of geophysical mapping in the cemetery, identified a number of interesting anomalies like that one, and that one turned out to be a zinc sarcophagus, the only zinc sarcophagus of its kind in the world, and very important because why would you build somebody in a zinc sarcophagus? Well, only because they were very important, and they died somewhere far from the Qumran area. They had to be transported there, and the only way to transport someone across the desert without their corpse stinking is to put them in a metal box. And typically they would have done that in lead, but lead's too heavy, so they used zinc. So this became a very significant burial, and in fact there's been speculation that it's John the Baptist or even Jesus. Has been some speculation. And that led to the discovery of a mausoleum here and some other interesting burials. And as they started excavating these burials, they found that they had very particular orientations to who was buried there. Were they Jewish? Were they Muslim? Were they Christian? How important they were. In fact, this burial, it was back calculated. The location of this burial is precisely where the sun rises on the summer solstice. So it was very important to survey this area in, as well as get some photo documentation of the orientation of the burials for a gross map view, and to very specifically calculate their orientation. So we tried a kite rig that we built ourselves with a throwaway camera, and it got in the air, took some pictures, and they were all incredibly out of focus. So, which I now realize is because of the shutter mechanisms. I really appreciate the simplicity of that silly putty shutter. But then we used the rigs Brooks built for us, and very nice photos. This is specifically that zinc sarcophagus, the adjacent burial, another burial in the foreground. We have a series of these pictures over much of the cemetery. There's 1,213 burials. We're slowly putting them together as in a mosaic, because we've GPSed in many of the burials, and we'll essentially have and then we'll tie them into the conventionally surveyed locations of all the burials. We'll have a photographic base map of the entire cemetery. So this was just in July, the end of July this summer. It was really our first stint with the kite photography stuff, and I hadn't really thought of using it anything other than these niche archaeological expeditions, but I was so impressed with the resolution. When we came back, I immediately wanted to try it on some of the other work we were doing. So this is a typical actually oil and gas facility. It's a compressor station, and here we were doing what essentially was the first three-dimensional imaging of an underground contaminant structure. It was actually abandoned flare pit. It was experimental for us, and what we wanted out of the kite photograph was simply to document the layout in relation to the contaminant source. The contaminant source was this wellhead, and it's actually very clear, but the smart might not be able to see them. These are the cable arrays. They're spaced every 5 meters. And so we simply wanted to document how our cable array was. Of course, we had everything GPSed in and sketched in, but there's nothing like a photograph. See the kite here? It's not always easy flying in Alberta, especially in Calgary. We're east of the Rockies. Very gusty, very irregular winds. But we usually do have sun. It's one of the sunniest places in the world. And we don't have many trees, which is another plus. Another use of the kite photography we found incredibly valuable is just simply documenting sites, what the site looks like on the day we go out and do geophysics, or soil sampling, or groundwater sampling. Simply for various reasons. One, for historical documentation. Second, for comparative down the road after reclamation purposes. Thirdly, as we start to map out where the sources of contamination are, or at least the areas of impact, we can then start to backtrack and see from the photographs, are they from tanks, are they from old wellheads, are they from the flaring of sulfur gases, or possibly from the dewatering facilities. So again, the pictures become very valuable. And what we're doing is we'll go out to the site, and we try to do this very quickly. We're generally out there for a day doing geophysics, and then at the end of the day, when the wind picks up, lift the kite, take a bunch of pictures. And we'll take a number of pictures, whatever we think we need to document the site. It doesn't look like as much here, but this is actually a critical picture. It's from the same site, and this is one groundwater monitoring well here. Here's another groundwater monitoring well. We certainly try to get all the groundwater monitoring wells into the photographs, and lately we've been having the hydrogeologists paint them yellow or red so we can see them. And then we mosaic them together. And since we have lots of survey points from the geophysics as well as all the groundwater monitoring well. This is the groundwater monitoring well we're just looking at. One up here, one up here. Since all these monitoring wells are surveyed in, we have reference points there. So then we can start mosaicing all the pictures together. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4 pictures. And then they're rectified by the survey points. We have a base map, a photographic base map of our site that we can continue to use. Just
what software are you using to do the rectification?
We've done it with a few different things. First we gave it to the geomatics people, and they use PCI, which is specifically for remote sensing. But then we also quite regularly do it with Geosoft, which is the which is a pretty high-end geophysical mapping package that also has abilities of stitching and warping and georeferencing. So yeah, Geosoft and PCI. Certainly one of the, I guess, fun things maybe about the kite photography, which I think everyone here understands, is you never know what you're going to see until you shoot the photograph. And the more photos we shoot, the more things we see, the more uses we see. This is another site, and this is a wellhead here that's been leaking salt water into an aquifer for probably more than a decade. And we went out there with geophysics, mapping the salt plume. But another thing we try to get out of the geophysics is the location of any buried utilities, cables, underground power lines, and especially pipelines, high-pressure oil and gas lines. And not only may they be sources of contamination, but of course you can have any drilling. You want to make sure you avoid those, especially the high power lines. So usually a utility locating company first goes out there specifically for that, and then they find some they miss. And then of course you ask the plant operator, and then we try to pick up that information with the geophysics. And right here you see very clearly this line going into the wellhead, and we had no trace of it in the geophysics. It wasn't on the schematic plans. It wasn't found by the utility locators. And in fact, what we realized afterwards is it's not the right of way for the pipeline. It's not where they dug moisture changes from digging for laying the line in, but it's actually the pipeline. And what causes the higher saturation of color in the grass is simply the heat given off by the pipeline. So this is great because it's a direct indicator of the pipeline. So the pipeline right-of-way may be straight, but the pipeline may zigzag back and forth from the right-of-way, and you can still see the pipeline. We see this quite regularly now. And again, we took a large number of photographs here covering this area and mosaicing them together. And then here we've actually overlaid the geophysics where we found the salt contamination. In this particular case, actually, the contamination fell off of off of the photograph, as it wasn't directly adjacent to the wellhead. But again, you can see everything is plotted in UTM coordinates. So that photograph and the map is fixed in is georeferenced in real-world coordinates, so it can be addressed, monitored for years down the road, regardless of what happens to that site. Another site we did quite recently. This is a section of the Elbow River upstream from Calgary, just essentially at the headwaters of the Elbow River. There's a small town there adjacent to the mountains, Bragg Creek. You know, it's one of these quite wealthy, edge of the mountain type towns, very exclusive. There's no central sewage system. They all use septic. And the city of Calgary is quite worried about septic plumes running into the Elbow River and then going downstream to the city of Calgary water supply. People at Bragg Creek, of course, say that's impossible, it's too sparsely populated, etc. But so we did some geophysical surveys, and in fact, we were able to very clearly map those septic plumes going down to the river and leaching out the river. And anecdotally, it's been said that in the spring, this particular reach of river where we mapped the plumes leaching to the river has very high algal blooms. It's very brightly colored along the rocks, and you can see the sources of discharge to the river very clearly because of the higher temperature and high nutrients in the groundwater of the discharge river. So we went just a few weeks ago, and we took a series of 16 photographs along this stretch of river, mosaic them together. We'll color balance them, and then we'll go back in the spring and photograph them again for comparative purposes to see if we can have this visual imaging of the discharge area. And of course here there's not a lot of features, so we just GPS the line of coordinates along the edge of the river, tying in the photographs so we can put them together into a georeferenced base map. Another site we're actually doing on an ongoing basis is a fertilizer plant in Calgary. It's a huge plant. It's 24 acres. It's 24 hectares. It's right in the hectare is 2.5 acres, so that's whatever 80 acres or so, 60 acres or so. And it's right in the middle of the city, actually, and it's being demolished. It's largely built of concrete, and it will take about 2 years of continuous work for demolition. So because it's right in the middle of the city, there's a lot of community interaction, community relations, and public meetings, and people want to know what's going on. And this particular company, Western Cooperative Fertilizers, is very interested in having photographs of the site for their public meetings. For one objective, and the other is it's simply just a great way of monitoring the progress of the demolition. So it takes about a dozen photographs to cover the whole site. We're starting to mosaic it together. We haven't yet, but this is one of the photographs. And we also, this is actually one of the more interesting areas that the public is interested in. This one building that hasn't been touched, this is what's called the NORM storage facility. NORM is naturally occurring radioactive materials. In the processing of fertilizer, there's, especially the phosphates, there's a lot of uranium uptake and uranium concentration. And some of that is pulled out in the fertilizers, and they store it in this building. Now that they're demolishing the building, they have to dispose of those NORM materials, naturally occurring radioactive materials. There's no clear-cut regulations on what to do with NORM materials in Alberta, so for the moment they're just keeping them in this storage shed. So this is obviously a concern of the public and especially the local community, so it's very comforting for them to see that the shed is still standing. We'll also shoot black and white of the area as well, just for essentially so we can compare apples to apples, so we can compare to older air photographs, black and white photos. Yes.
Roughly, how high were you, and what kind of lens did you use?
We're about, in this case, about 700 feet, and we're using. I have two rigs that Brooks has built for us. One. But they're both, one has the Asilomar style separate 35 millimeter point and shoot, and the other is a Rolei, I think it's a 28 millimeter lens. point and shoot. This was done with the roller.
Thank you.
And another site which we've taken photographs, but we haven't yet mosaic together. This is bioremediation site. These are what are called biopiles. It's an oil field contamination site. The soil is contaminated with hydrocarbons and salts. The contaminated soil is built up into these windrows, irrigated to leach the salt out. The salt goes into this pond. And then, of course, this will take many years, especially in cold northern climates, for the biodegradation to occur. So you need some type of monitoring to see how do the local community wants to know, do the windrows stay in place, or is soil contamination being spread all over the area? Of course, the engineers want to make sure that the windrows are staying in place, and that vegetation is starting to take place. So this is a very useful qualitative or semi-quantitative way of quickly and inexpensively monitoring the piles. And again, we take many photographs and then we mosaic them together. Last set of slides. This is a site of river engineering that we've been working on. And actually, our work's been completed, but it hasn't gone very well. This is the city of High River. It's on the Highwood River, just south of Calgary. And the problem at this site for the city of High River was that large amounts of soil were building up under the river. They built under the bridge. They built the bridge. It's sort of geomorphologically a bad place, the inside bend of the river, where naturally it accretes large amounts of sediments. So the sediments building up, it's tending to move outward, block the channel. As it starts to block the channel, it also at the same time it constricts the river flow, and that causes the river where the channel is to move faster and then scour under the bridge abutments, and then where it builds up under these near bridge abutments, vegetation starts to take place, and that can structurally impact on the building. So our hydrology group built these groins this spring to speed the flow of river under the bridge, so it would take away the sediment. And we had a very large spring flood this year, and in fact, even more sediment built up than had in previous years. So the city wasn't very happy, no hydrologists, so they wanted some photographs to first see what's going on, and secondly, some photographs in place so that they could use this for monitoring purposes to see for next spring flood, before and after spring flood. So here's the groin and the sediment buildup. And again, we will be mosaicing all these photographs together. We haven't done that yet. Here's directly looking down. There's a railroad bridge here, and here's the road bridge. You can see how the sediment is building up from both sides of the river, starting to constrict the river. Another complicating factor is this construction of a river diversion canal, as you see right here. And you can see this is actually just a few weeks ago, we were already getting ice on the river, and you can see very clearly the channel. It's actually quite nice, the ISO, because it's just a thin layer of ice. It's transparent, but it keeps the turbidity of the river down. And a few other things again, it's amazing the kite photography, you see all these things that you weren't even looking for that are just as interesting as what you were looking for. These are fish habitat structures that they built at the time of the river reclamation work. And it was comforting for the hydrologists to see that they were still there, that they hadn't been washed away in the spring flood. But what wasn't comforting is that they're clearly much too shallow to be of any use for breeding sites. And another thing, this is upstream, downstream. And when the contractors were, one of the other parts of minimizing the sediment building up under the bridge was to remove cut-away sediment from some of the upstream bars. And the contractors were supposed to do this in a very, in a fashion that would conform to the natural morphology of the river, that wouldn't look engineered. And it was assumed that occurred, and it kind of looks that way from the ground, but you can see very clearly that these groins were cut in anything but a natural fashion. So that wasn't very, very comforting either. And again, it wasn't something we were particularly looking for, but you can't hide it from the photo. And another very uncomforting item that came out of this photograph was that, again, as I was saying, we have two problems. One is that the sediment is building up under the bridge and then prograding out to the river. And the other is that as the river is constricted, the the speed is increased when you get scouring under the bridge abutments. But what's also clearly occurred that you can't see from the bridge is that these pipelines here have actually been completely scoured out and are totally exposed. Pipelines, especially high pressure oil and gas lines, should not only be under the ground surface, but they should actually be deep into the bedrock if possible. And here, in fact, these ones have already been exposed and are very susceptible to being completely ripped out in the next spring flood. And again, very clear. You can see a bundle of 3 pipelines completely exposed, but no trace of that from the ground. And then a photograph of that construction site of the where they're building. Another company is building. The city is building a canal diversion. And my final picture I just took a couple weeks ago. We were testing a rig that actually a kite that Brooks just sent us down, a low wind kite, the Pilot 50, and this is right in the center of Calgary. It's Nose Hill. It's a park. We weren't looking for anything in particular. It's the largest city park actually in Canada, but it's right in the center of the city, completely surrounded by housing and urban areas. And what's amazing in this photograph is here's a teepee ring here. Here's another teepee ring here. If you remember in the first year physical map, the magnetic map I showed you from Rocky Mountain House, we had interior hearts that were square from the 19th century, and then exterior corners. So those would be like in the center of a building like this. So those would be most efficient. You have a hearth on each side. Then the exterior corner hearts. Here's certainly a 19th century cabin structure. And then we actually see the circular structure here, which was certainly an exterior hearth, and actually a number of smaller teepee rings at various locations. And I mentioned this to one of the archaeologists, 5 years at the University of Calgary, expert in prehistoric archaeology. Had no idea that these existed in the city. So certainly I'm extremely impressed with the technique. I didn't really expect to. I just came here to learn. I didn't expect to be giving a talk here, but Brooks asked me, and it's certainly been very valuable for me to be here, and I'm very excited about the possible applications as I become more technically competent in the technique. Thank you.